Hi, my name's Jessica Porter. How's everybody doing today? What time is it in Israel?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
So it's dinner time. Excellent, excellent moment to talk about the 7 levels of judgment, right, as we eat. Alice Fava's here. Hi, Alice. So nice to see you. Sinai, my friend Tracy in Florida, Clara. This is lovely.
Yes.
Yes, the Finermans. This is great. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. Ruth. I think I've met Ruth. Have I met Ruth? I don't know. You look familiar.
I don't think so, but you look familiar.
Yeah, maybe
You haven't done
we didn't know it.
another lifetime.
I'm going to talk about this concept called the 7 levels of judgment that was developed by George Ohsawa, who is the sort of great-grandfather, the founder really of modern macrobiotics. And if you've hung out with Gannat and Sheldon at all, you have a passing familiarity with what macrobiotics is. But I want to, before we talk about the 7 levels of judgment, sort of dig back into the concept of yin and yang. The Taoists gave us words, yin and yang, for a phenomenon of balance that is constantly occurring through all of nature. If you look at any natural phenomenon over time, you will see a movement in one direction and then the equal and opposite movement in another direction, like birth and death. Clouds gathering precipitation and rain falling, evaporation and condensation, our hearts beating with the pulse of in and out, in and out, in and out. And yin and yang are these lovely terms that can express contraction and expansion, cool and hot, open and closed, up and down. But basically they're the labels for duality. And we all live in the material world of duality. Now, what George Ohsawa and other greater minds have also presented to us is that there is a unifying principle sort of within, and that this yin and yang duality is playing itself out upon. In other words, what we might call God or source or spirit or the unifying field is this transcendent phenomenon that is allowing the duality to take place. The divine third, so when in macrobiotics, we study yin and yang. We study how this duality works. And it has laws. I mean, it is governed by natural law. And one of the things that we learn, let me just open my PowerPoint here for a second. Oh, please be here. Where'd you go? Where'd you go, PowerPoint? Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm gonna go up to the top. Sorry, this is all, something's missing on my thing. Let's expand this. Come on, come on. Oh, maybe it won't expand. Yin and yang refresher. Yin attracts yang and yang attracts yin. So opposites attract. We say that to ourselves all the time. But the next thing is, come on, come on. Why won't this go? You know what? I don't have entirely yin and nothing is entirely yang. At their extremes, this is the most important one. At their extremes, yin becomes yang and yang becomes yin. What this means is when the heart is contracted as far as it can go, it begins in the opposite direction. When the rain cloud is as full as it can get and the energy builds up, builds up, builds up, it releases. When the heat in the atmosphere is hot enough, evaporation occurs. So when something like peaks, we see it coming around to the other side of the cycle. An exhalation, your deepest, deepest, deepest exhalation that you do in yoga automatically begets an inhalation. This is very important. So I'm going to stop the share for a second. So the 7 levels of judgment are actually an observation I believe Ohsawa made. He may have borrowed it from somebody else, I'm not sure, about our development as humans. And he outlines these levels of judgment that we go through after we're born. And it's a fascinating study just to look at them through that lens and go, wow, I begin with like mechanical judgment. I then move to sensory judgment. I move to emotional judgment, intellectual, social, ideological, etc. And we will talk about them through that lens, but there's another way of looking at them which permits real freedom and allows us to see the potential that we can see in ourselves with macrobiotic practice. So back to my incredibly amazing screen. Okay, so the first level of judgment is mechanical. What we mean by mechanical, and let's look at, I'm going to use an example of a subject that we can look at through these different lenses, that we can judge through these different lenses. And let's imagine we're talking about food. So when it comes to the mechanical level of judgment vis-a-vis food, that is simply, I am hungry, I must eat. Meaning there's no taste involved, there's no opinion involved, there's no timing involved. It's just the mechanical need underlying food. Now, the mechanical level of judgment, like every other natural phenomenon in the world, has its yin to yang cycle. So tell me, when it comes to food, what's the yin to yang physical dimension of eating? What extremes do we go to when it comes to eating? Can anyone answer that? I just sort of alluded to it.
And I'm full.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. I'm hungry, emptiness, fullness, fullness. And fullness eventually becomes emptiness, and emptiness craves fullness. So that's our mechanical level of eating. Now, you can go from fullness to emptiness relatively quickly, or emptiness to fullness. You can go from emptiness to fullness in 15 minutes, and you can go from fullness to emptiness in a few hours. So the mechanical level of judgment in almost anything personal is a relatively quick turnaround. Like the beating of your heart happens in just about 1 second. So the mechanical is a short-lived journey generally, but that doesn't make it unimportant. In fact, the mechanical level of judgment may be the most important. But we tend not to be aware of it often. We tend not to think about it too much. And within the realm of judgment, this is the level of the body. For us personally, our body is a myriad, represents myriad mechanical systems. In macrobiotics, this is the level on which the food actually gets in. And we're making really strong choices about the quality of food that we put in our body so that the mechanical level of judgment works optimally. And we'll see why that's so important. All right, the next level of judgment is the sensory. The sensory level of judgment, that's us perceiving the world through our senses. So if we think about these levels of judgment being the developmental levels of a human, a baby comes into the world and they're just like crying because they're hungry. And they're pooping and they're sleeping. And that's about all that's happening. And, you know, joy at being fed because there's the relief of hunger. But then you start to see sensory preferences. You know, 6 months old, even earlier than that. But when a baby starts to get solid food at around 6 months, you know, maybe they don't like the green beans. Maybe they don't like this. Maybe they don't like being touched on their back. Maybe they don't like their diaper being changed because it's uncomfortable, it's cold, the smells are weird. I don't like my diaper being changed, but whatever. So we then explode into the sensory level of judgment. Now, this is a fantastic level of judgment, especially when it comes to food. So with food, the sensory is like, I love chocolate cake. I love corn on the cob. Ooh, I don't like bitter greens. Ooh, I don't like, you know, snails. Whatever it is, like there is strong preferences, great pleasures. And in the yin to yang cycle, in a sensory judgment, it too is a very quick thing. You ever notice that when you're eating something lovely, like let's say you're having chocolate pudding, you really, really enjoy the first couple of bites. Like they trigger all sorts of neurotransmitters and memories. And the third is good. And the fourth, you're not really paying attention to and you probably shouldn't be eating. And the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 95th are just a waste. So the sensory level of judgment is often slightly longer than the mechanical, if we think of the mechanical being like a heartbeat. Now that we're seeing each level of judgment having a yin to yang cycle, and is this making sense? I want anybody for whom this is not making sense to like go into the chat and say, what are you talking about? And then let me know if anyone asks questions. It's important to understand that between the yin and yang of a sensory experience, so that's the height of like enjoying it to the numbness of not even paying attention anymore. And the same with the mechanical, and the same with all the judgments that are to come. We can get stuck on one side of the spectrum. Like a heart can start to not be very good at expanding and only good at contracting. In a sensory judgment, we can be like snobs about a certain sensory experience and we want it all the time and we get addicted to it. Addictions live in the sensory level of judgment as much as anything. They exist on other levels too, but the sensory is really, you know, a heroin addict wants that feeling. And at the same time, we can become really hard around our aversion to certain sensory experiences, like kids that are incredibly picky eaters, adults who are picky eaters, people who just are shut down, or they're just shut down on the sensory level altogether and not feeling, not sensing. So on every level of judgment, instead of the yin and yang having its nice flow, we can stop and become enslaved to stagnation in that department. With macrobiotics, one of the points of it is that you're eating balanced food, soft, gentle, natural, balanced food. And that balanced food allows you to keep being in the nice flow of yin and yang. All right, so we're seeing that the mechanical level of judgment, if you got problems on it, those are big problems because your body is doing something out of whack. On the sensory level of judgment, if you're having problems on it, that could be, like I said, not enjoying sex, not being addicted to a substance, being something where there isn't flow. Next, the next level of judgment is emotional. So we have feelings that aren't sensations. We have internal emotional events. They're like weather systems in our body. They're really, really important. They are like our tuning fork or our weather vane of our lives. How we feel internally tells us what to do next in our relationships. It tells us the next move to make in our lives. It helps us to unpack old trauma and to ultimately feel clear and balanced and content most of the time, and not be enslaved to major stuck weather systems emotionally. But the emotions are very, very important. And emotions have their own yin to yang cycle. If you're feeling anger because some relationship is out of balance, someone owes you money and isn't paying you back or whatever it is, there's like, and you should be able to move through it. You should be able to process it. You should be able to have a conversation with that person. You should be able to write about it in your journal or talk about it with somebody else. If you're feeling sadness because you've lost somebody, grief is very real. Grief comes and like snags you by the neck. But it too has a beginning, middle, and an end, as hard as it is. And it makes you go very deep. It carves you very deeply. But ultimately, we move through grief. Even joy. You know, you feel joy at the birth of a baby, joy at a celebration at work, whatever it is. It has its peak and its denouement. Emotional yin to yangs generally last longer than sensory yin to yangs. I can feel joy about the birth of a child for weeks before my mood is taken by something else. I can feel grief about a loss for months. I can feel joy about a birth for months too, but I just mean they're longer than sensory experiences. Likewise, when we get stuck on the sensory level, like let's say I have a resentment against my cousin, potentially I could feel that my entire life. I could come back to a certain feeling again and again and again for decades. Now that's being stuck on the emotional level, but we can get stuck on the emotional level. There are people who do not make it through grief. There are people who will not let go of resentments. They do not have the tools or the wherewithal to work through them. And this is intense. That's George Ohsawa talked about, you know, being stuck, or Michio maybe, talked about being stuck in the yin or yang of any level of judgment, or just to perceive solely from that level of judgment and not have the capacity to access the other ones or move through the center line, which we'll talk about in a second, as, you know, that's sort of torturous. It's like a form of slavery when you're stuck on a level of judgment and you don't have the freedom to play. And the play is to move between the yin and yang. To be fully alive is to feel grief, is to feel anger, is to feel joy, is to feel contentment, is to feel bored. I mean, to go through, and the ability to flexibly cycle through all sorts of emotions. But we can get stuck. Maybe you recognize that on some feelings you have been stuck in the past or are now. Oh, I didn't mean to go there. Stop it. Intellectual. So imagine a baby starts mechanical, wah, 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 gets sensory, then becomes emotional. A baby at 9 months, they have, strong feelings about things happening. They have opinions. Don't do that, mommy. Don't leave me, daddy. Don't yell at me. Whatever it is, there's attachment. And then ultimately, a little later, when they start to grasp language, or that's when we perceive that they're doing this, we develop the intellectual level of judgment. We start to have abstract thinking. We begin to understand the alphabet and put together words. And then this whole level of judgment for the rest of our lives has the capacity to really, really bloom. And we get educations, we learn about ideas, we learn about history, we start to have perspective on our worlds. It's a great thing, the intellectual level of judgment. But it's not the only thing. And in the intellectual level of judgment, you sit there and think, well, what's the yin and yang of the intellectual? Is it like learning everything and then learning nothing? No, it's that ideas have a lifespan? Can anyone tell me about an idea, like in science or philosophy, that had a lifespan, like it lasted a couple hundred years, and then we were like, oh, we were so wrong about that? Anybody?
The earth is flat.
The earth is flat. Yeah. I mean, intuitively, it made perfect sense to perceive the earth is flat. That made perfect sense until we disproved it, and then the astronauts really proved it, unless the moon landing was a fake. But I'm not even going there. I don't believe that. So the earth is flat. Smoking is good for you. You know, leeches help pull out things that you are possessed by a witch. I mean, you're possessed by the devil.
All of those could be true.
Stop it. Even, you know, what was interesting, like in the last 20 years, in 2000, we introduced the concept of the microbiome into medicine and science. Well, the microbiome has just like blown out of the water tons of previously accepted theories. In fact, you know, we were working on the germ theory, kind of like that all bacteria was bad. And then we realized like, oh, oops, not only is bacteria insanely good and helps to destroy bad bacteria, you've got 2 pounds of it in your body, in your gut, and critters all over yourself. And without them, those critters are so important that there was a certain antiseptic soap in the United States that became, like, they took off the market because it was too good. It killed too many bacteria. So ideas have lifespans. And many, many people are very attached to the intellectual level of judgment, and they consider it sort of the roof of consciousness. You know, atheists, there's a whole society of skeptics where they do their best and get enormous pleasure, like punching holes in any woo-woo wah-wah religious or new age theory. Academia is a whole, you know, subset of American culture that's, you know, the brain on crack, where it's thinking and devoted to the pursuit of the expansion of the intellect. There's nothing wrong with either of those things. It's just, if the intellectual level of judgment is your highest level of judgment, or so you think it is, and you're a snob about it, and you are stuck on it, and you don't see that ideas have lifespans, and that maybe you shouldn't get ever too attached to any idea, that's a problem. Now, it may not be a problem to the intellectual, but in the greater scheme of things, we'll see why it might limit their capacity to enjoy life fully. Any questions so far? I just want to entertain any questions that we might have so far. What's wrong with my tooth? Yeah, I know, it's rotting. It's disgusting. I can't get to a dentist. Oh, sorry. I can't get to a dentist in the pandemic. That needs to be yanked out, new tooth, it's the whole thing. Thanks for asking, Josie in Santa Barbara. No questions. Okay, let's keep going. All right, the next level of judgment is social/political. This is very interesting. So we don't just have like universities and houses of ideas and stuff. We've done all that within these weird phenomena of countries and sort of tribes, meaning like royal families and political dynasties. And it's just a really interesting thing that humans as a species have collected themselves in groups. I mean, it's not that weird. It's just that the bigger the group gets and the more, you know, space it takes up, then we have like a country, and we have laws, and we have history, and we have our flag, and the foods that we eat, and the pride that we take, and all of that. This is a level of judgment. This is, I am an American. I am a Democrat. I am a feminist. I, you know, either choose to wear a mask or I don't. Or I went on the marches, but I didn't. This is really important. It's a level of judgment. Imagine a kid goes from wah wah to I like chocolate to mommy don't leave me to I'm in 6th grade and I'm starting to learn French to oh, my family votes Republican. Like it's a bigger picture to be looking through. But the socio-political has its yin and its yang. Tell me about a political or national experience you've observed where one extreme eventually became the other. Anybody? Over time, these can take time. We're talking like 100 years.
I'll give you a quicker one. The Weimar Republic turning into Nazism in Germany.
Right. The Soviet Union falling overnight and becoming this sort of rogue, authoritarian, wild cowboy capitalism craziness. George Bush to Obama to Donald Trump. Big back and forth politically. Thank you.
The kibbutz movement. The kibbutz movement stopped being socialist.
Oh, okay.
Kibbutz
Yes.
stopped being socialist and became capitalist.
Wow. See, there you go. Everything eventually becomes its opposite, and then ultimately becomes its opposite again. That's the thing. So when you have a big view, and it really helps to look at politics and history exactly this way. When you have a big view, you start to know that when something hits an extreme, it's going to shift in the other direction, because guess what? It's got nowhere else to go. There isn't an extreme beyond the extreme. So this is very interesting. And we do find that there are people who are what we call, and I fall into this category sometimes, like news junkies, where their whole world and their attachment and their identification is knowing what's happening in the world right now. And, activists and I'm not poo-pooing activists, they're really important, but having your entire identity and life force attached to your political activism you may be not living so deeply on the other levels and lack balance in your life. And that happens. And sometimes activists sacrifice their health, their wealth, and their happiness to their cause. And in many instances, maybe they should. But a balanced view of the social political is to have the big view and understand that, even this cycles, even if it takes 300 years, there's a cycle here. And that's a very interesting way of looking at it. So let's go to the next level. Ideological. The next level of judgment is ideological. This is the stuff of religions. This is the stuff of great philosophy. These are ideas that are the study of principles. They're the study of natural law. This is the level that begins countries. This is the Enlightenment principles behind the founding of the United States. This is any ideological set of principles that underscores our lives, a movement, a country, our personal practices, our religions. And on the ideological level of judgment, you're dealing with some pretty big stuff. This is like, what is the meaning of life? Where do we go after we die? What is death? Why should I tell the truth? What is fairness? What is freedom? Now, this is a very high level of judgment. And it may be difficult to actually see the yin and yang I mean, you could see the individual yin and yang in some of those principles, like freedom. It's like, well, you could have no freedom, and you could really even have too much freedom in some ways, like too much liberty is chaos. This is a really important level of judgment that hopefully most humans spend some time at. However, when we get too attached to the ideological level of judgment, we begin to identify too much with it. We take our ego on board and say, well, I live in the ideological and you don't. That's when we get religions duking it out for ownership of the ideological level of judgment. And the irony that a religion, which is trying to live on the ideological level of judgment, can end up going to war over it is just ironic, because the ideological level of judgment generally is not, you know, when it plumbs the values of great things, war is not one of them. But that's the yin and yang of the ideological level of judgment, is that we can be so attached to our set of answers that we get stuck, and that stuckness can be dangerous to ourselves and dangerous to other people. So it is, at the end of the day, just one level of judgment in our lives, albeit an important one. And the thing about ideology is that it can last for thousands of years. What comes out of the ideological level of judgment, like great religions, great philosophies, you know, we've seen them. Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, like thousands of years. And so no wonder we can subsume ourselves to this level and think it's a permanent ride. But it may not be a permanent ride, you know. Ideologies do come and go as well. The values, the principles they're based on may not, but the ideologies do. So,
Just on what level would you put war?
social, political, and ideological. And mechanical, sensory, emotional. I mean, there's war has all, you know, like you're going to experience war on all levels. It will interfere with all levels. It will create extremes on all levels. But that level of judgment from which you would start a war would be socio-political and ideological. And of course, there's emotions involved there too, but you don't start a war because of your emotions necessarily, depending on the leader that you have at the moment. It'll definitely be justified by the social, political. And, you know, wars traditionally sometimes have been fought just over scant resources. And that's definitely social, political. Like if my people need that lake and I don't want you on that lake, you know, I might just take it. And then there isn't much ideology to it. So, yeah, and war and peace are another yin and yang. Wars happen, you know, when we don't have enough stuff, when everything builds up to an extreme, we have an explosion, after which we have a peace. So these are the levels of judgment that all of us are used to going up and down and exploring these, whether we know it or not. We're functioning on these levels of judgment all the time. I hope by looking at them, you might see, ooh, sometimes I can get stuck on this level. Sometimes I can get stuck on this level. And oh, I love my chocolate cake, or I hate Republicans, whatever it is. You know, there's to see your own attachment. Because we live in duality, it's really important to maintain a flexibility on every level, if only just to see the possibility of flexibility on every level. The next level of judgment we don't talk about much. George Ohsawa called it the supreme. The supreme level of judgment is enlightenment, basically, but not in sort of like, oh, he's enlightened. It's the ability to be absolutely present in the moment, right now, heart open, mind open, and to exist beyond attachment to the duality on any level of these levels. If you've ever eaten brown rice and chewed it 150 times a mouthful, you've experienced a version of the Supreme. Like you almost can't put together a thought, or every thought that comes is just this beautiful, clear, oh, moving to kitchen now. And the mind quiets and the soul or the spirit expands. This is the type of consciousness we're looking for in meditation, that we get sometimes from yoga, that we have in moments of awe, that we are looking to cultivate in spiritual practice, and that religions aim at and often experience, but with their own version of the story behind it. This supreme consciousness is something that we are all available to, or is available to us all the time. And it's not better than the other ones, by the way. That's what's interesting, is that often we have this like spiritual hierarchy where it's like, oh man, my life is all about chocolate cake. I wish it were about supreme consciousness. Or I'm watching the news addictively. I wish it were about supreme consciousness. What's great is that this is actually the way to look at it, is the Supreme is like this elevator that actually goes up and down all the other levels. The Supreme is not like, oh, go sit on a mountaintop, and meditate all day in order to achieve the Supreme. It's cultivate this in the moment open presence while you eat the chocolate cake, while you watch the news, while you go to religious teachings, while you explain your resentment to your cousin. And I love that, because I think that's how it actually is. And when we take the so-called spiritual and shove it in some disembodied place that no one can achieve, we denigrate all these other levels. And all these other levels are actually there for us to play on. And George Ohsawa even said that. He's like, the point of the life is freedom. And freedom meant being able to discern the yin and yang on every level and go, ha ha ha, the Russians are Soviets. Ha ha ha, the Russians are, in a whole other position than they were 20 years ago. Oh my God, we have Donald Trump. Oh my God, we have Barack Obama. Like, to have perspective and to go on the rides of the yin and yang from the Supreme. And the way to do this, according to macrobiotic theory, the best way to do it is to have the macrobiotic diet and lifestyle in the mechanical. If I'm eating whole grains and plant-based protein and lots and lots and lots of vegetables, but specifically whole grains, when I said earlier that underlying yin and yang is what we call the unifying force or the unified field, whole grains like brown rice, millet, barley, quinoa, kamut, spelt, whole grains are the unifying field in a food. They're whole, they're unified. And the more unified field foods I eat, the more I have the unifying principle in me, which brings about supreme consciousness. And then I can just go ride on the other levels. And the mechanical level of my body, my heart, my lungs, my nervous system, my cardiovascular, they all work in their pulse, in their rhythms, in their correct way of functioning. And then the ride on all the other levels is just fun. It's just fun. And I see myself get attached and go, oh, I'm attached. Oh, I'm arguing till I'm blue in the face about some idea. I can't get off it. Oh, I better let go. I better just free it up and let go back, eat some rice, let go and get some perspective. So, like I said, the point is not to be the perfect person. The point is not to be better than other people. The point is not to understand this perfectly. The point is to play, to have fun, to enjoy, to make mistakes, to get attached so that you can see yourself getting unattached, to be unattached so you can see yourself developing attachment. And this freedom, this lightness comes about from eating nature. I mean, we're eating nature. Nature's playing all around. Look at how flexible nature is. Look how strong nature is. Look how easily nature moves through its cycles without any, mishigas. And that's what a macrobiotic diet and lifestyle helps to enable or achieve. Oh my God, 9:42. Questions? 7:42 for you guys. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
So why do you like this model so much?
I like this model so much because it kind of explains everything. It's like it's human existence in 8 slides and a way of approaching it that permits my engagement with everything and yet demonstrates that there's freedom in doing that, or can be freedom in doing that. I think it just explains everything. I love it. For me, it's a key that unlocks an enormous amount of information, but also identifies a lot of problems that we can get into and how to solve them. But more important, why do you guys like it? Come on, I need not just feedback, I don't mean that, but if there are questions, I don't want anyone to, hi Alice. I don't want to squander any time we have if people have questions. Yeah, Brian.
I have a question. I have been studying macrobiotics for about 6 years. And of course, at the beginning, I had the understanding that you need to have brown rice and miso soup and yada, yada, yada. And as my condition changed, I kept eating the same thing. And without listening to what was going on and adapting to what was going on. So to your spreadsheet that you just shared, it seems very much the same thing. As political situations change or other situations change, instead of adapting to what's going on, we keep trying to hit the issues with the same solution that maybe worked 20 years ago. So I thought this was a brilliant synthesis of all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And, it's so interesting, Brian. Thank you for bringing that up because, as much as I point to the mechanical level and say, we need to be in the yin and yang, it's actually quite tricky when you're first learning macrobiotics to know how to keep flexibility in the food. Flexibility in the food is really important. Like, we as Americans are sort of like, well, this is what I do on Tuesdays and I'm going to slot it in. And we like to have a system that we can just forget about and rely on. But if you tune out in the kitchen, it's really easy within macrobiotic practice to suddenly be getting a little too much salt, a little too much grain, not enough variety, not enough vegetables, start to get phobic about fruit and stuff, because becoming young, becoming contracted at first feels really good. And then you're like, ooh, I want more of this feeling. I want more of this feeling. But before you know it, you're actually stuck in the mechanical on too salty, too grainy, too young. And then you've lost flexibility on all sorts of other levels. And then you see yourself having aversions to certain tastes, having opinions about things that are sort of hard, not being emotionally very flexible. And so learning macrobiotic cooking is really kind of a lifetime process. And I've been doing this for 30 years. And I still feel like I'm stepping into profound appreciation for variety and freshness and how much it matters how much salt I put in things or the volume of certain things that I eat. So just keep exploring. I'm so glad you've had that insight because it's a really important insight. And some people, never get it or don't get it for 15 years and they're 10 more years down the road than you are, and 10 more years tighter and more inflexible. So that's great. Yeah, I ate brown rice pretty religiously for about 7 or 8 years. And then there was just a point where I was like, enough, like I need to eat barley as my principal food. And it changed everything. It not only changed my condition, it changed how I looked at it all. I realized like, I'm not in a brown rice cult. Like nature, doesn't force me to eat brown rice. It's just people telling me to. And as soon as I broke out of that and realized I got to choose and I got to listen to what my body preferred and what made me feel more free. And that's different for everyone. Sanai, who was here earlier, she comes from Japan and she loves brown rice. It feels like home to her. And my people come from like Scotland and Ireland, and barley feels really, really good to me. So you got to find your thing. And then it's going to change, and after a while, it'll change.
There's an interesting question, Jessica, from Pelucha, saying that yes, too much yang is dangerous, but don't you think that macrobiotics in general is becoming too yin?
Interesting. That's a really interesting question. I don't know. Macrobiotics in general, it's difficult to actually consider that question because maybe we're so yin that it's hard to determine what macrobiotics in general is. I think with the deaths of Michio and Adalbert and Chico, we've had a real shift, and it remains to be seen how macrobiotics will reorganize itself in the wake of those things. But the food itself, do I think it's become too yin? It's such a personal question. Balance is so personal. What I find, here I'll answer it personally. What I find is that I can get off track, and I tend to go to the yin side of things when I get off track. Like I like, more sweets, or I'll have, I don't know. I'm just going to explore more on the yin side than the yang side. What I find is that when I return to whole grains, beans, vegetables, seaweed, and soup, cooked well by someone who knows how to do it, I feel balanced. Now, my grains, beans, yada, yada, that thing may have less salt in it than yours. I might put some orange in the seaweed, might be slightly more yin than your version of that. But instead of looking at is macrobiotics too yang or too yin, what I would say is what we need to, each individual needs to come back to figuring out what is that place that feels amazing. And I would say we're all pretty much, with a little 20% flexibility on each side, that's the same for all of us. But it's got to change, even that, it changes seasonally. What I will say, my final answer to that is that I think that the word macrobiotic gets thrown around a lot. And I've heard people be like, oh, this is a macrobiotic meal, or I'm macrobiotic. And then you plumb the depths of that, and it means nothing compared to my experience of it, meaning they're conflating macrobiotics with vegetarian. And if we're looking through that lens, it's become way too yin. If macrobiotics starts getting used for raw vegan, if someone just thinks the word macrobiotic means healthy, and I think a lot of people think that, not a lot, but some, then, oh yeah, it's gotten way too yin, forget it. Because then you're eating like, date coconut energy balls with spirulina. Any other questions? Alice, you're on 2 screens. That's a neat trick.
Talk about too yin, it's schizophrenic. Well,
I
I
do want,
wanted to,
Oh,
go
wait.
ahead, please.
Another question.
I was just going to say, I like the color of your living room behind you.
Well, I wish it were mine. It's my friend Ernie's. He's in Nova Scotia right now, but it is a great living room. He's
Yeah,
very handy and he's painted everything beautifully. So thank you. I'll let him know.
yeah. Paula's kitchen this morning was a very vibrant yellow, very, very energetic as well. It's a very great day here, so I'm loving the vibrant colors. So,
Where are you, Brian?
Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm in LA. It's sunny, sunny, sunny all the time, especially in the summer.
Mm. Yeah, that was
My
just the comment. So, yeah.
my possibly final question, or anyway,
Yeah.
question. In my life, I use yin and yang a lot. I think about things in terms of the rose-colored glasses that Ohsawa talked about. I'm wondering the 7 levels of judgment. I love that theory. Do you also think about it often in your daily, day-to-day?
No, but I'll tell you when I think about it. I think about it when I observe somebody else, because one doesn't necessarily have clear glasses on oneself all the time, being stuck in one of the levels of judgment. I'm like, whoa, this person is an intellectual snob or a news junkie or, you know, a sacrificial activist or a religious fanatic or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like that's when I suddenly that template comes up and I witness what I know. I think I use it less for myself. Just
So it
because,
helps you to defer judgment so you don't become judgmental about another person. You think,
yeah,
oh,
no, I just see it as like a certain stuckness. And I'm like, wow, they could be in the supreme, you know? They could be like present right here, right now in their humanity, like living this moment of their brief and precious lifetime. And not instead, it's not like they're dead, but where that energy is going is shoving down one alley really, really, really hard. And I see that as uncomfortable and ultimately unsustainable and painful on some level because, you know, we're governed by homeostasis. Our body wants to be in balance. Our psyche wants to be in balance. Like our spirit wants to express itself. We want to be whole. The whole rigmarole is designed to support our wholeness. So when somebody has taken an idea or a food or an activity and just put everything into it, like jam themselves so hard into that thing that they themselves are missing, it's like, whoa, that's a bummer. What a great way. Whoa,
Yep.
that's a bummer. No, so that's when it comes up into my head. I mean, I get stuck all the time on things, but I meditate and let go and hopefully eat pretty good food that helps me to let go. And then I can just be present and available to life.
yeah.
You know, it's really interesting. I've been reading Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I hadn't read it. It's been around for like 30 years. And I hadn't read it because I thought it would say things like clean your desk. You know, and I will never clean my desk. So I thought, who cares? And I finally am listening to the audiobook. And it is so beautiful because he's talking about living a principle-centered life. And the principles of fairness, of integrity, of honesty, of the things that, you know govern us, whether we pay attention to them or not. And he makes a comparison between like the principle character and what he calls personality/behavior. And we become a culture that's so about personality and behavior, like just social media is just almost 99.9% just like, here's my personality and here's what I'm doing. And that's who I am, it's my personality and what I'm doing, instead of these more invisible characteristics that we develop, that take time to develop, that actually have us align with spiritual principles. And I found that so incredibly refreshing. And in a way, what he's saying is be in the elevator of the 7 levels of judgment. Develop the qualities that are in the supreme elevator and that get you to the supreme elevator. And then you can be on social media if you want, it doesn't matter, but it's not going to be your whole ego there, your whole identity, your whole life. And I just found that refreshing, because sometimes I can get hypnotized by the world and be like, oh my God, I'm supposed to have like a zillion YouTube followers and blah, 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 blah. And he just, shot right through that. I was like, no, like, develop your character. That's the thing you're bringing to every single interaction. That's the thing you have in real life, or like, that's the thing that you're going to leave behind when you're done. No one's going to be looking at your Twitter feed when you're dead. No one cares.
No one cares when you're alive either.
What?
No one cares when you're alive. No, it's
right. I mean, I don't, but I feel like I should. And that's me slipping down one of the yins to yangs. I mean, because guess what? Like, Facebook, in 5 years, no one's going to be on Facebook. It'll be a new thing. It'll be a new platform. You can look at the yin to yang cycle within the digital world and see it really easily. Oh, PayPal. Oh, no, wait, Venmo. Oh, like, change is so rapid. And you got to just get supreme and just watch it instead of being enslaved by it.
I love the supreme.
Am I the wisest person you've ever met? Let's just face it. Let's just call it.
Too.
I love Sheldon and Gnat. Yes, we're done. It's 7:59. Everyone has to eat dinner.
Yes, it's definitely too late by now.
I know it's day late to say Shavua Tov, but yesterday.
Wow, are we impressed?
The day before, Shabbat Shalom. I've got an interview of waiting to be unlocked.
I'm just in the mold.
You didn't see the question I put up. I asked, is passion the same thing as being stuck?
Is passion the same? So Clara, by passion, do you mean passion about things, or do you mean sexual passion? For both?
No. Passion about anything, just putting your whole self in. You kept describing it as being stuck. And I think of putting your whole self into something as being passionate about something.
So I guess the stuckness would come if and when that person can't see that passion itself has a yin to yang. Like, after passion comes rest. After passion may come reflection and integration, and then another pulse of passion. Then you're not stuck. Then you're just doing God's work in a rhythm. But if it's passion and you can't sleep, and you can't eat, and there's no rhythm, there's no self-care, there's no cessation of that pulse, that's a problem. Now, great artists, the great artists, maybe some of them had mania or were bipolar, you know what I mean? Like, had some real extremes, like their yins and yangs may have been more intense mechanically than the rest of us. And but look at Sanai Suzuki. Sanai has beaten back death 3 times, and if you look on her website, you see all the stuff that she creates. She's maybe the most creative person I know, and it's all very quiet. You know what I mean? It's no big deal. It's like, oh, I'm getting chemo, I'll make my own knitted caps. Oh, let's make some jewelry with that sweater that I just made, with the flower essence that I just grew in my yard for the dogs that I feed every day. It's just like, I've noticed, being macrobiotic, I used to say, I feel like a multi-petaled flower blooming in all directions. Like, that's nature's template. And so I watched it. My friend Simone Paris, who's a fantastic chef, that she made clothes, made like birthday cards for people, made stuff, was an amazing cook, was beautiful, did this, did that. And I just thought, wow, that's so weird. Like, I've never met a creature like this. And then after being macrobiotic for 6 or 7 years, I started to see it myself, that I did a radio show and I sponsored people and I was writing a book and I, did my version of all those things. And I think we can be extremely good at and very devoted to several things at once, do them well, and be balanced. And be balanced. You don't need, if your way of doing it is like big passionate expenditure of energy, as long as you find balance, great. But you can also, be an activist on Mondays and a mother, and do that and and explore macrobiotic balance. It's pretty trippy because I found that I started to be good at almost everything I do. And I don't mean great, but I mean good, and sometimes great. And that defied conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom is if I focus over here, I'm ignoring over here. So if I'm good at this, I'm probably crap at that. And that was just not my experience. So you can be passionate, very passionate, and come home and be quiet and tender and soft. That's all. Look at a thunderstorm. It's a pretty fantastic dynamic. Nature's got everything in it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a great question and a great answer. That was really nice.
Great question. All right, you guys go eat.
Okay, then you have breakfast.
Yeah, I'm gonna have breakfast.
Thank you.
It was great seeing all my Israeli friends and from other places as well, Toronto, Cleveland, Tampa, Susan, I think who's outside of Philadelphia. I love you all. Mwah, mwah,
Mwah, mwah, mwah. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everybody. Another great forum, and we'll see you back here September 1st.
Shavua Tov. Thank you, Ginat.
Shavua Tov. Thank you. Bye.
This was
Bye-bye.
wonderful.